Good afternoon. Thank you guys so much for coming down for the last plenary session for today. We have three very special guests. The first guest that will be speaking to you today is Tom Cech. He was born and raised on a farm near Clarkson, Nebraska, graduated from Kearney State College with a Bachelor of Science degree in math education, and later received a master's degree in community and regional planning from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He was executive director of the Central Colorado Water Conservancy District in Greeley, taught water undergraduate and graduate level water resource courses at the University of Northern Colorado and Colorado State University, and is now the director of the One World, One Water Program Center for Urban Water Education and Stewardship at Metropolitan State University of Denver. Welcome, Tom. Our second speaker is Justice Greg Hobbs, Jr. He was appointed to the Colorado Supreme Court in 1996. He received his law degree from the University of California, Berkeley, and a BA from the University of Notre Dame. He practiced law with an emphasis in water, environment, land use, and transportation, and served as Assistant Attorney General to the State of Colorado Natural Resources Section and Enforcement Attorney, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. He taught 6th grade at St. Paul's Catholic School in New York City in 1967 and served in the Peace Corps with his wife Bobby in Colombia. Our third speaker today is Dr. Patty Limerick, and she is the faculty director and chair of the board of the Center of the American West at the University of Colorado, where she is also a professor of history. She was born and raised in Banning, California, and graduated from the University of California at Santa Cruz. She received her PhD in American Studies from Yale University and was an assistant professor of history at Harvard. In 1985, she published Desert Passages, followed in 1987 by her best-known work, The Legacy of Conquest, an overview and reinterpretation of Western America. In 2012, she published A Ditch in Time, The City, the West, and Water, A History of Water in Denver. Limerick is also a prolific essayist, and many of her most notable articles, including Dancing with Professors, The Trouble with Academic Prose, were collected in 2000 under the title Something in the Soil. And I'd like to turn it over to Tom Cech now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, and it's an honor and a privilege to be here and to be in the panel with Justice Hobbs and Professor Limerick. I'm going to keep my comments fairly short because the meat of the program is right over there. I'm with the One World, One Water Center here at Metro State University. If you've been walking around campus, you may have noticed the big art piece, the round One World, One Water sculpture near the Student Success Building. We received a $1 million grant a few years ago, over 5 years, to do 3 things here on campus. One was to create a water center, which would create a water studies minor and certificate for any major on campus, any academic major. So we have students in our program who are majoring in history, journalism, art, theater, environmental studies, biology. What's so cool is we get to work with classes in the theater department where they create a water-related program to go to middle schools in the area to teach 6th graders about the arid climate of the West, what's a rain shadow, why should we care about our arid climate, and learn about population growth and so forth. So we get to work with a wide range of faculty and students here on campus. Second goal of our center is to create water stewards on and beyond the beyond the campus, and that's kind of where we get into this community of water and ecology and environmentalism and so forth, where students learn about water resources and then they can get engaged in whatever way they want. Perhaps it's urban agriculture, perhaps it's politics, perhaps it's learning more about the history of the area. Lots of different ways to come at the issue of water. Then third is to create experiential opportunities for students. Well, that means internships, career paths, field trips. We were in Nebraska a couple months ago looking at the migrating sandhill cranes in Nebraska. Took a group of students to San Luis in southern Colorado, learned about the Spanish acequia systems a few weeks ago, which was really wonderful, and just a wide range of things of that nature. Justice Hobbs is on our advisory council that we have for our One World, One Water Center. And we're real proud of helping develop water stewards and more knowledgeable water folks from a student perspective, faculty, and staff. So that's a little bit of my background and what we do here. But what I'm excited to hear is our stories about John Wesley Powell and the politics of water in the region and community growth. And this will be fun. So, Professor Limerick?
here, or no, we're loaded. We're loaded. That's in the state of Colorado with some of the laws we have on what were formerly illegal substances, that phrase. Marijuana is what I'm making a joke about. Okay, moving on. So, howdy, thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. I think that the idea of fracking appeared somewhere in our presentations, and I have been very much engaged with the subject of hydraulic fracturing and shale gas, and I have given myself a holiday from that in this presentation, but I'm perfectly happy to return to it. And yet today I'll be going much more directly at the central issues of water in this region. So I would like to begin with this helpful sign. I've seen this fellow in the Denver International Airport for years and years, and I love the festive mood in which he is slipping. It just gives me delight to see him in DIA, because you might expect, this wee sensation there is just a delight. And so for me, since I work in many controversial topics in this region, hydraulic fracturing, water, immigration, and so on, he has become, I think it's a he, has become an inspiration to me, to be in a precarious situation, tense topics, and to be at any moment ready to lose your footing, but also, he doesn't look like he's going to regain his footing, but every once in a while I do have that privilege. So to begin with the impact of water in this region, the first American explorers who came into the area that we call the Front Range of Colorado, Zebulon Pike and Stephen Long, were quite different people, and they nonetheless reached exactly the same conclusion about what they saw in this region and really the plains leading up as part of their journey, that this was the great American desert. There was simply not enough water to support conventional American settlement. So both of these fellows in the early 19th century concluded that this would be a region where Americans could not settle. And here's what's a little bit surprising. They found that to be good news. This is, again, early in the 19th century. The nation is new. Nobody knows how much geographical spread a democratic republic can sustain. So rather than thinking, oh, what a calamity, we have to go home and report that there's a limit to how far the United States can expand, they actually felt they were returning with good news. Our citizens so prone to rambling, Zebulon Pike said, will have found a limit. They also, it's interesting, they also thought it was good news because if white folks did not want it, this, they thought, could be a solution to the conflict with Indian people. That Indian people could be placed in this region that whites wouldn't want. So here we are in the early 19th century with a pretty ardent, certain prediction that this region would never sustain a population, so that the topics of Americans in conventional settlement, that topic of the impact of water on communities at that stage in the game meant no communities, or very, very few, very sparse ones. What were they responding to? Here is the conventional, often shown map that the darker the region, oh, I'm going in the wrong direction. These are not precipitation patterns. This is the exact opposite. Sorry, the one that I want. How did this, well, anyway. Okay, this we'll just start with this one then instead. This is the distribution of water within individual states in the West. The green bar is agricultural water use, and the blue bar is municipal and industrial use. This is in 1990. It's not dramatically changed since then. And I start with this slide because young people do not know the phrase "in the catbird seat." And so I like using that phrase because it brings, for instance, Justice Hobbs knows the phrase "in the catbird seat," right? People of a certain age understand that means that you're in a good situation. Anybody under 50 is bewildered by it. So every once in a while I like drawing a sharp generational line. But also it raises the question of what does that mean to say that we live with a scarcity of water in this region if we were to undertake major agricultural water transfers, which we may or may not choose to do, even with some episodic drought, we still have a lot of water going into agriculture that could be moved into municipal and industrial growth. If we choose to do that, there's many virtues and reasons to keep agriculture in this region. There are many reasons to line the ditches of agriculture, to minimize the evaporation and spray agriculture. But it just says that what Pike and Long saw so clearly turns out to have been a prediction of shortage and scarcity that drastically underestimated what human beings can do to manipulate, to store, to distribute water. This is the one that we didn't want to look at. Oops, right here, sorry. Okay, this is when I got right in the midst of many of these issues. I wrote a book on the history of water in the Denver area called A Ditch in Time, and yes, that is a clever play on a stitch in time, saves 9. I thought it was clever. It's like many issues in the American West, to put something in writing on a controversial natural resource issue is to put yourself in a place of, controversy and contention. The famous anecdote that I'm sure probably many people have heard about the writer who died and went to heaven, went to St. Peter's Gate, and St. Peter said, well, I can show you, you're just right on the balance line here. You could go to heaven, you could go to hell, we just couldn't figure it out. So what I'll do, you get a choice. I'll show you hell and I'll show you heaven. You can make your own choice. The writer thought, well, that's not going to be much of a choice. So St. Peter took him to hell, and in hell they saw a whole bunch of people sitting at desks, working away, writing and writing and writing while they were whipped and beaten and cursed and yelled at by demons. And so the writer thought, well, I don't think I would want that. So then St. Peter took him up to heaven, which was exactly the same scene. People at desks writing and being shouted at and whipped and criticized for their poor writing and so on. And so the writer said, well, now I'm confused by this. I've seen hell and I've seen heaven, and I can't see the difference. They both look quite terrible. And St. Peter says, well, there is a difference. In heaven, you get published. So there's good news and bad news in that with controversial issues, maybe especially with fracking. You get published, and then the whippings and the cursings and all actually kind of pick up. So I'm not sure which way that should go. I will say also, for somebody writing about Western water, this is a dilemma. There is a classic movie that many people of a certain age have seen, and many people have watched that movie, even though it has little historical content, and it was made by a man with, well, uncertain is too flattering a term, moral character. But that movie still exercises way too much influence over popular thinking about Western urban water, and convinces people that water inevitably produces bitter and actually murderous conflict. In other words, in writing a book like A Ditch in Time, it was time to take on Roman Polanski's Chinatown. When you think about Mr. Polanski's character, the notion of letting him set your judgment of anything becomes a very suspect idea. So, in fact, the history of Denver water has, some regular power mongers and major figures exercising as much authority as they could for their own profit, but it has very little in the way of the Chinatown plot, very little of that notion that water in urban areas is intrinsically a elicitor of evil and bad behavior. In fact, and I call to your attention here, as much as it is the fashion to denounce the corrupt aggrandizing of a precious resource by cities, in this state, Denver water supports 25% of Colorado's population with a little less than 2% of the state's water. So if you were going to be dismayed over profligate use of water, this is a comparatively small target. People, which is all of you, will have noticed there's something wrong with that number, that these people living in this metropolitan region eat. And every strawberry, every ear of corn is an agricultural water transfer produced somewhere else and brought into the city. So that is not a full calculation of the water, but it's still something short of the wicked city swallowing up the resource and denying the rest of the state that resource. I thought because of the media thing, it might be interesting to dramatize the adventures in public communication as we try to speak in terms that are not Roman Polanski's terms, that are not agitated in shrill terms about this situation of water in the West today. So I have a very fine example to present, a specimen of somebody really struggling with public communication on this. This is the Atlantic magazine website, and a month or two ago, the Atlantic called me, so I will be the tragic specimen, the pathetic specimen in this story, and asked me this question: can Californians adapt to their catastrophic drought? Well, how could I possibly know the answer to that? Those are the moments with reporters where you should just say, bad connection here. I am not a prophet. I'm an historian. How could I possibly know? How could I even have an informed guess on that? But instead I said, okay, here we go. So they taped it, and then they transcribed it, and they just posted it with I had no chance to weigh in on it. So here we go. This is too funny to watch me try to take this on. It gets better. It's very sad at the beginning, and then it gets better. Okay, here's the interviewer, Russell Berman. First question: how bad is the California drought in the context of state history and U.S. history? Okay, so what's going on in my mind is I will not get pulled into his categories of good and bad. I will not do that. So I hear the word bad, and I am overcome with caution over that. So, okay, Patty Limerick. I would not use the word bad. I would just say severe, and severe at a new scale and a new intensity and a new urgency. And then I realized why am I not using the word bad? I have to explain that. I'm not using the word bad because I see this situation as a call to action. It is a wake-up call, and that might be good. Though, and then I think of the poor souls suffering whose livings are disappearing with the drought, and I think, oh no, now I've called it good. That's not going to work. So then, I correct course again, though I don't want to call it good because there are people in a pickle now. Pickle, that's a great phrase. Glad I used that one. So the struggle goes on. So I wouldn't use the term good or bad, but this certainly puts us in a new framework for thinking about who we are and how we live and what are necessities and what are luxuries. And that has virtues and values to it. So you think, let this poor creature out of her misery at a certain point as you watch her just maneuver. And then, okay, so just one more example, and you can see that I actually do finally get my footing. Remember the gentleman so happy that he was falling and slipping, so that's me here. Russell Berman, but it's not as simple as saying that the drought is the result of climate change, I think. Oh no, climate change. Oh no, our Congress is paralyzed. We're in a calamity of communication, and now I have to do climate change. Limerick. It's certainly not that simple. Climate change is certainly in there, and I would say that one of the things that drought invites us to do is to get out of our, I suddenly see daylight, I think I see daylight here. Drought invites us to get out of our unproductive tug-of-war over whether we can even talk about climate change. One of the great aspects of the drought, and I'm not calling it good or bad, but one of the great... I probably waken the night twitching over the words good or bad now, but one of the great aspects is that a drought does say to the American people, do you want to move on from what has been a really unfruitful, unproductive, stalemated conversation about climate change? So I've got my footing, I'm on my way. I think the drought says, sober up. Have a mature conversation in which climate change is one of the things discussed, but population growth is discussed, and this extreme emotional commitment to green lawns and ornamental gardens with plants that you cannot eat and probably even goats cannot eat. Let's put all of those factors into the conversation, and let's not lose our bearings by picking only one topic and throwing out all the others. Whew. So it gets better. But this is just, I just thought that was, as I looked at that damn thing on the website, I thought, what a great way to show the misery of this topic. Here is the phrase I have been trying to make into a household phrase. It is on its way. The fourth time you say it, you can remember it and use it in your household. The last 100 years, I would like us to think. The era of improbable comfort made possible by a truly astonishing but taken for granted infrastructure. And when you have that, and you think of the last 100 years in that phase, you sort of know where we are at this moment. We are coming out of the taken for granted phase, which is good, but deeply awkward. I just used the word good, but very awkward and very full of friction. So I was very proud to see, I Googled this today, and it appears on maybe 12 websites, the era of improbable comfort made possible by a truly astonishing but taken for granted infrastructure. If you want to form groups and chant that together, that would probably heighten the learning process. Okay, we are in the midst of a confident phase here in Colorado, maybe. This is our governor and the director of the Colorado Water Conservation Board. They are at an event celebrating the arrival of a draft of a state water plan that would put together different basins, their needs, and get us launched into a framework of making decisions for the future in which we are thinking broadly about the state, but also in very focused ways about particular places and their needs. This is my background music for reading the state water plan. The State Water Plan is a pretty cheerful document for saying now we can reason together about this complex issue. And this is an important water policy expert who often but his chorus here, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, you just might find you get what you need. If people will read the State Water Plan and take that to heart and maybe have that in the background, there might be some hope. Humor is extremely valuable and deeply underutilized in discussions of water. This is our former head of the Denver Water Department who had a madcap sense of humor and who wrote a very funny statement that I will read if somebody in the audience wants to ask that when we get to the discussion, where he talks about his opinion of trans-basin diversions, water moved from one basin to another basin, from the western slope of Colorado to the Front Range, and he, in one paragraph, uses flowery rhetoric to celebrate trans-basin diversions, and in the other paragraph uses disparaging, pejorative language and says, this is how I've made up my mind and I will not change it, even though he's just said two opposite things. That, I think, could help us in all kinds of ways, deliberating on humor. And then this is my closing story. What we don't have in place at this stage is a setup where our discussions of water, of natural resources in general, where we can have someone speak in ways that we did not see coming and in disorienting and troubling ways, I suppose. We do not have episodes of hydrologic frankness that everyone agrees to attend to. So, yes, indeed, the conversation can be very uncomfortable. These people can be lightning rods. But I think we need these delegated deliverers of uncomfortable bluntness in the water discussion and in many others. These are historical episodes that are not exactly inspirations, but they do suggest the value of an occasional moment when the restraints on a public figure are, at least momentarily, removed. So this is John Wesley Powell. He is very often cited in matters of water. And I will close with a statement where he was invited to speak by a bunch of fans. In 1893, John Wesley Powell, who had written eloquently about water issues and was a great advocate of irrigation and supporting crops through the diversion of water, the Irrigation Congress invited him, citizens supporting the diversion of water to agriculture, invited him to be their speaker at a conference in Los Angeles, 1893. He arrived, he listened to the speakers that preceded him, he worried more, he worried even more, because it seemed to him that their visions of an abundance of water diverted to support agriculture on a vast, vast scale, he found that not only unconvincing, but very troubling. So when he threw out his prepared speech, and here is a description from the biography of Major Powell by Don Worster, and I'll just conclude with whether we can make more of this sort of occasion, though it's an awkward one. Okay, so John Wesley Powell, here's a description from Donald Worster. He came to the podium as the grand old man in their midst, the nation's greatest authority on the arid West. Tossing aside his more technical speech, he gave them instead a brief, off-the-cuff, sober appraisal of their ambitions. This next part is a quotation from Major Powell. When all the rivers are used, when all the creeks and the ravines, when all the brooks, when all the springs are used, and when all the reservoirs along the streams are used, when all the canyon waters are taken up, when all the artesian waters are taken up, when all the wells are sunk or dug that can be dug in this arid region, there is still not sufficient water to irrigate all this arid region. And then this most beautiful quotable line, what matters it whether I am popular or unpopular? I tell you, gentlemen, you are piling up a heritage of conflict and litigation over water rights, for there is not sufficient water to supply all these lands. As Donald Worster concludes this description, now Powell was speaking like a heretic in a church full of believers. Instantly, the Irrigation Congress delegates were on their feet, waving hands, interrupting, blurting out angry questions. So that is my concluding remark. Could we, as a society, as a self-governing nation, could we ritualize these moments where we say, when we're having meetings about all of our controversies, all of our topics, we pause and we say, and now, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the point in this agenda when we will hear from our heretic and traitor. And then the Major Powell figure, that's not an introduction to the next speaker, I'll say that. But that's totally not that. But it is, I think, it would be helpful to have more humor and to have that moment where heresy is listened to. It does not have to be embraced, and that's why I'm hiding behind Major Powell. So, and really, that was not an introduction to the next speaker. That's so important to emphasize. So I shall now sit down, having left you in confusion about why I said that just before Justice Hobbs came up. But, okay, thank you so much.
Thanks for your introduction, and it's always great to share a conversation with Dr. Limerick, who I will fondly call Patty, because she certainly is not only a scholar, she's one of the great communicators about water ecology, living together, solving problems with wit. I have never failed to see her sense of humor and talk about serious subjects at the same time, so she has a great gift. And she steps out of the university context, well-credentialed. She's been the president of many historical societies. I won't say that academics splinter into different associations, but apparently happens. She bridges all of that with her humanity and her scholarship and her common sense. So I've been a poet longer than I've been a lawyer and a judge. So I would like to read a poem that I often read when I speak to folks that are interested in water and interested in Colorado and the West. And it's a celebration of our rivers. And I wrote it for the 30th anniversary of Colorado's pioneering in-stream flow law. So in 1973, this state, that started out of a mining agrarian context and then gave rise to the great cities, celebrates its water by creating an in-stream flow program that allocates water rights to the environment. And that is a signal and change of values for our generation, because John Wesley Powell, despite being a runner of the Grand Canyon, said exactly what he said. He thought all the water was going to be taken out of the streams and put on agricultural lands because the perpetual future of the West would be agrarian. He did not visualize, Thomas Jefferson did not visualize that the West would be the greatest urbanizing democracy in the 20th century and the 21st century because of sunshine and, yes, aridity and open space and clear skies and vistas and all of this, trout streams and kayaking and fishing and recreation and having it all. Don't we love to have it all? And so a water rights system has to figure out how to allocate water for the changing customs and values of the people and still honor those who got rights and want to continue to use them. So on the Colorado Supreme Court, we do the appeals from the 7 water courts in Colorado that are drawn around the 7 major river basins, and the appeals come directly to the 7 of us, bypassing the Court of Appeals. The only other type of case that the General Assembly is assigned this direct appellate method to, because otherwise we choose which cases we take from the Court of Appeals, is the death penalty and water rights. So you got it? Water and death. Bonga, bonga, cowabunga. Here we are. Welcome to Colorado. Now, we haven't executed anybody since one person, since 1967, decided to waive all appeals, even though we still have a death penalty. But we do have a system of water rights. But you can't live in the Great West without celebrating the rivers. So here is Colorado, mother of rivers. When I was young, the waters sang of being here before I am, of falling sweet and soft and slow to berry bog and high meadow, and held me in her lap and cooed the willow roots, the gaining pools, and called me through bright dappled grass, and called me, "Oh, my shining one," and shaped a bed to lay me on, and played the flute so high and clear. and shape the stones to carry me when I am young and full of fight, for roaring here and roaring there, for pouring torrents in the air. When I am young as mountain snow, and crag and cleft and cracked window, I call the greenback cutthroat trout. I call the nymph and hellgrammite. I call the hatch to catch a wind. I call upon the mountain track. I call the scarlet to the jaw as morning calls her own hatchlings. Call Yampa, White, the Rio Grande, San Juan, the Platte, the Arkansas. So we need to celebrate our great land and our great landscape. And the peoples have loved this land so well. There are 4 reservoirs that archaeologists have now discovered at Mesa Verde that operated between 750 and 1180 AD. 4 reservoirs by the ancestral Puebloans, plenty of catch basins, cisterns. They were smart water conservationists to live in this arid land of the North America, Central America, and South America. There is an aqueduct in Peru just outside of Cusco. Some of you may have seen this. This was not built by the Romans. It was built in the year 200 AD by the indigenous Quechua people bringing water into the Cusco Valley. So this idea of engineering that Dr. Limerick mentioned and population growth and dry cycles and wet cycles is the enduring legacy of the Americas and gives us the context in which we respond generation to generation. Now, you have the inset map here to the Citizen's Guide to Colorado's Interstate Compacts. I also serve as the Vice President of the Water Foundation and Chair of the Publications Committee. In the year 2002 to 2003, the legislature was in a horrendous drought. Turned out to be a 14-year drought, and still recurring, created this non-advocacy water foundation to communicate with citizens about water. We've now published 37 Headwaters magazines and 10 citizen guides. This is the inset guide to the compacts. What is a compact? It is an agreement between upstream and downstream states to share the interstate waters. And when it is approved by Congress, it becomes federal law and interstate water sharing law. So Colorado sitting as it does on, if I were to step outside here, as you all will soon, you'll see the Great Divide. We're on the east side of it. The west side is just over the hill there. These snow sheds serve water to 18 downstream states, 19 including Colorado, and the Republic of Mexico at the Rio Grande and the Colorado River Mexican border. So the extent of Colorado snowmelt goes to the Mississippi River, to the Gulf of Mexico, to the Sea of Cortez. The whole interior Rocky Mountain stronghold, the southwest of our country, the country that Abraham Lincoln, in his great credo of liberty, wanted to be free soil, homestead land, anti-slavery. Colorado was formed in February of 1861. Lincoln's elected. The South leaves. The South wanted this territory that the U.S. got as a result of the 1846 Mexican-American War to be slave territory. And Lincoln condemned the Mexican-American War in his one term in Congress. And his buddy said, don't worry about ever being elected to politics again. This is 1845-46. And he condemns President Polk. Well, this was a slave conspiracy to add land here, he said, for slavery. So what do we have here in the West? We have 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo adds 40% of Mexico. The 1846 Treaty of Oregon, of course, Oregon Treaty, adds the Northwest. And we know the Louisiana Purchase went up the Arkansas River, 1803, to the divide up to Montana. So that's us in the West trying to live in this arid land with all these people that now want to come here and live here. What do we do about this? We share these interstate streams with 9 interstate compacts. There were 2 U.S. equitable apportionment decrees. If you can't enter a compact with a downstream state, you litigate it in the U.S. Supreme Court. And we couldn't agree with Wyoming and Nebraska, so we have the North Platte and Laramie equitable apportionment decrees in the U.S. Supreme Court that bind us here so that we can only consume about a third of the water that Colorado produces. 1/3. So we must live on whatever Mother Nature provides from year to year, decade to decade, constrained by these delivery requirements. So 2/3 of this water off the divide is being already shared and is going downstream. Now, Colorado finds itself in a wonderful stance on this, right? It gets the first drink, it gets the first recreation right, and then must shepherd the water on the way out of the borders and hang on to what it has because of these growing downstream states like California who would like to have some more, right? So this kind of puts us in this colorful box of, yes, we're the stewards, but no, we believe in the interstate compacts. That's our future, right? Vis-a-vis downstream states who might develop it and want to have it and will be in conflict forever. Well, in the early 20th century, statespersons settled these matters of interstate delivery. Now we have to live with shortage. There's the 7 Colorado River Basin states. You know them: Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, and Utah. And then the lower basin states, Nevada, Arizona, California, and then, of course, the Mexican border. This is the Land Office map of 1902. It's a microcosm and my favorite teaching tool for seeing how Colorado was formed. So we have this trapezoidal shape created by the Union Congress in 1861 out of Nebraska, Kansas, New Mexico, and Utah territories. See, we didn't exist. We're created by the Union Congress to do what? To hold the newly discovered gold fields against the Texas Confederates. So we are carved like this because the Continental Divide comes out of Wyoming, takes that bend down to the Collegiate Peaks, takes that fork down to Silverton and Durango, that great bend comes back to Wolf Creek Pass and plunges into New Mexico. All right? So that's why we're carved like this. But what do we get? We get the headwaters of the great watersheds out of this shaping. The Platte, the Arkansas, the Rio Grande, and the complex of tributaries that form the Colorado mainstream. So that's where we sit. That's the catbird seat, Dr. Limerick. Yeah. The bird gets the worm, the cat gets the bird. You know, you try to get peace in the valley. So what does this map show? Lincoln runs on the Homestead Act of 1862, the Land Grant College Act, and the Railroad Act. That was his platform in 1860. He's a pro-Western free soil infrastructure guy, a settler. That's what he wants to do, is settle the West. Well, of course, it was fully occupied by Native Americans, and there's many consequences of that. And the fact of the matter is that one of the consequences is that when the Peace Commission came out after the Civil War into the West, they created these treaties. Here on the left-hand side of this Land Office map, you see the Ute Indian Treaty. Almost 1/3 of Colorado, 1868, here on the west side, right? The Ute Indians. There was a reservation for the Navajo, right? 1868. We wanted to turn them into farmers. Well, Nathan Meeker, who helped found the Union colony at Greeley, was made the Indian agent over on the White River in the Ute Reservation, perpetually set out for them, plowed up their horse track. They were great horse people. They got the horse because when the Spanish were kicked out in 1680 in the Pueblo Revolt, the horses got loose. The Plain tribes got the horses. They became the master horse people. So the Comanche come out of the Wind River territory, right? The Arapaho and the Cheyenne are on the east slope. The Utes are on the west slope. The Navajo are in New Mexico, right? So the irony of the creation of these reservations is that in 1908, the U.S. Supreme Court says, by the way, the Indian agent was killed, right? Nathan Meeker, and 4 bands of the Utes were shoved out to Utah. This land was put back into homesteading here, and that's why the water rights on the west slope, we date it by priority of use, are 1880 or junior. The water rights on the east slope, because the farmers were right on the heels of the miners who came out here in 1859, the ditches in the Platte and the Arkansas date back to the 1859-1860. So they have the priority water rights. So at any rate, the U.S. Supreme Court in a Montana case in 1908 says that Congress couldn't possibly have created these reservations unless there had been some water reserved for them for their future. And so we have these Indian reserve water rights with these early dates that were ignored because the government didn't assume its trust responsibility of building these irrigation projects for the Native Americans. They built them for the Anglo immigrants. So you got this whole system of water rights in the West founded on prior appropriation, first in time, first in right, that turned out to be junior to this reserved water that the Indian nations, now lawyered up by lawyers who don't answer to the Justice Department, filing these cases and getting state and federal judges like us to recognize their reserved water right, to which these others are junior. So you have all these settlements that are going on, if Congress will fund them, to make justice. Shall I say that? So that's one of the endemic problems here. The other is delivery and honoring the compacts. The other is honoring in priority these agricultural rights which were founded first, right? They're valuable use rights under property law doctrine. So you can't just, the government can't wave a wand and say, well, we don't like you to, grow alfalfa or whatever you're growing this year. We need it for the cities or the environment. That's not how it works. But we have a lease and buy structure for transferring the senior priorities through our water courts. So there's that famous snake diagram. 85% of our population on the east slope on these puny plain streams, the Platte, the Arkansas, Rio Grande. Yes, the Rio Grande is east of the divide. And then this great bulge of water that goes down to Lee Ferry, right, the dividing line between the upper basin and the lower basin. 70% of the water is produced by Colorado under native flow conditions at Lee Ferry, but we can only consume a third of it, as we owe the lower basin states water negotiated under the 1922 compact. So Tom tells me I have about 5 minutes. That's what we live by. The hydrograph, right? The peak, the snow melt, right? May to July, and then it's like the flatline patient on a table, right? So if we don't store the water, and we have 2,000 large and small storage buckets in Colorado, it's gone downstream. So we have valuable water rights for storage to use the rest of the year to grow our crops in our municipalities and put water back in the stream for in-stream flow. Our 7 water divisions, so these are where the 7 water courts sit. They have a major drainage basin. This was another of Powell's idea, was major governance units. Well, actually, we do this in Colorado because we have a water judge, a division engineer, and water commissioners to enforce the decrees of the court in each of these basins. The appeals go directly to us. So we get to love water and hate water and listen to attorneys and read briefs and decide water cases because that's what we do instead of, other alternatives. And there's our transbasin diversions. I'm sorry. You saw most of the water's on the west slope. We do divert it to the east slope. There's about 26 transbasin diversions, tunnels, ditches, bringing water to the east slope. And the Colorado River Compact allows each of the 7 basin states to use the Colorado River water, not only in the Colorado River Basin, but wherever in the state it's needed. That was the basic deal. There's my son's farm at Avondale. He grows 9 varieties of garlic in the Pueblo chili. He's an organic farmer. This is a lot of work, setting these siphon tubes. He's about a half a mile from the Arkansas River. Most of that return flow after the irrigation is going right back in the river and is serving downstream rights. And that's the Blue River with an in-stream flow on it below Lake Dillon. Okay, so we're trying to integrate these water rights for the environment, for water supply, for agriculture. There's the controversial Western Slope hayfield. Is this a waste of water or not? These land and water trusts are trying to buy up and preserve these hay ranches so that they aren't divided up into little ranchettes and so that cities don't permanently remove the water. So that's the great controversy that Dr. Limerick alluded to. How much water do we want to take out of agricultural use, including this kind of use which is alleged to be very wasteful? As a matter of fact, these hayfields are about 19% consumptive, and the water is going right back in the groundwater and back in the stream. This is a bench just above the Colorado River, right? So it's a lot more complicated and witty than we ever could have conceived. There we go, below Grand Junction, floating in this water that needs to go down to the lower basin. We love it. There's a great blue heron. There's the great Glen Canyon Dam. By the way, dams, the reservoirs fluctuate. That's what they're made for, huh? Bathtub rings. That's, good water year, it fills up. Bad water year, you see what the cliffs used to look like. You get it both ways. There's me fishing below the Glen Canyon Dam. My brother Will, the great young adult author, Will Hobbs, writer of 20 young adult novels, Bearstone, Bear Dance, Downriver, River Thunder, lots of books set in the West, the Northwest, and Alaska. Will Hobbs, who writes out of Durango and fishes below the Glen Canyon Dam. There's the endangered fishes on the Colorado River we're trying to preserve. There's the lower part of Glen Canyon Dam that isn't dammed. As you see Lee Ferry there, there's Will in the boat, Lee Ferry, the dividing line between the upper basin and the lower basin. There's rafting, Grand Canyon rafting, right there down the river for about 225 miles. There's Lake Mead. There's California-Mexico border. There's the Morelos Dam that takes their water. The Morelos Dam dries up the Colorado River on the right. That's a saline drainage from an Arizona water district on the left, above and beyond the 1.5 million acre feet we owe to Mexico each year. But last year there was a pulse flow put down that river where Mexicans came out who hadn't seen a wet river in 25 years playing in there because the Tijuana earthquake knocked out that distribution system out of the Morelos Dam, and the U.S. in turn gave the Mexicans the right to store water in Lake Mead. So they can store water and release it how they want to now between this international collaboration. A lot of interesting things happening. There's the La Cienega, the last vestigial wetland swamp there, fed by that Welton Mohawk saline discharge out of Arizona. And here's what the ancestral Puebloans left us all across the plateau of the Colorado River. And what are they saying to us? Hello, goodbye, and good luck.
Wonderful.